principal one being, why are those tax reforms bills sent to the National Assembly by President Bola Tinubu provoking widespread negative reactions, especially across the northern parts of Nigeria? Beyond the emotional outpouring by those who are opposed to them, in what ways can these reforms, if properly implemented, help or hinder the country's need to accelerate development? In search of answers, we are now being joined by Baba Yusuf, the Group CEO of Global Investment and Trade Company, a special economic zones expert and first substantive managing director and CEO of First Airport Free Trade Zone in Nigeria. Good morning, sir. Good to have you join us on the morning show today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Steve, Shoiton, and Adesua. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Yusuf. All right, let's get straight into it. The tax reform bills by President Bola Tinubu has been generating a lot of furore. And of course, I'm sure that you have followed what transpired in the Senate during the week, and of course, what has been happening over time. Defense has been mounted, but it looks to many people that, yes, there may be some clear, interesting components in those bills. But then, have Nigerians had enough time to critically look at these bills, to study them, and to digest what they portend? I guess that this is why a lot of people are asking questions. But then, what will be your own thoughts in terms of adding yet another layer of reforms when the government of the day is barely 1.5 years old? Are we ripe for the type of tax reforms that the Asiwaju administration is bringing at this point in time? What are your thoughts?
Thank you once again for having me. This is an omnibus question, not surprising from you, Steve. First of all, you asked the question about why the concern by some sections of the country with regards to, the reform. And two is the content of the reform provisions as proposed to the National Assembly. And thirdly is the timing of the reform vis-a-vis, what has been going on in the administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, in the past 1 year plus. Now, for me, I'm a northerner, and I believe that the reforms, especially with regards to tax reform, and another leg of it is the review of the national fiscal policy, which there's a loud silence, or people are more fixated on the tax reform, part of this reform is a very key reform that we need in Nigeria, because the existing tax policies, have, as far as we are concerned, have become antiquated. You are very correct when you alluded to the concern maybe because of the timing. It's not a function of the timing. I think it's a function of the consultation, constructive engagement with the critical stakeholders in a way and manner that the current optics will be corrected. And what do I mean? There's a lot of engagement that have been going on between the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform and the critical stakeholders on the government side, for example, the State Inland Revenue Services, the State Commissioners of Finance. The chairman of the Reform Committee has said it loudly that they have been engaging, including trade unions and whatnot. But I think one of the key areas that was missing was trying to sensitize Nigerians over and above politicians and public public office holders, with due respect to them. Because indeed, this optics is what some of the people that are not proponents of the reform are using. And of course, Nigerians are now concerned, especially if you talk about the northern part of the country, because the feedbacks people are getting maybe are not the feedbacks they are supposed to get. There is issue of
lack of complete information. There's the issue of misinformation, either deliberately or inadvertently. And that should be corrected by the Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform Committee. One of their responsibilities is also to engage Nigerians. I know I have seen the chairman of the committee in various media outlets trying to speak to, quote unquote, to the elites. Or maybe over the course of 1 year since they have been there, they should have also reached out, even in local dialects, vernacular, and pidgin English to people that really matter, and that is Nigerians. But let's fast forward and park that aside. We are where we are here today. The president, I mean, it's like an executive bill had been sent to the National Assembly. And we have representation at the National Assembly from across all Nigeria. So I would have expected at this point in time, whatever grouse that everybody has, will now put it into the debate and see how we can either push for the bill or, quote unquote, kill the bill, as the case may be, if indeed we are representing the interest of the people. The governors have been engaged ab initio for 1 year. What kind of input have they had with regards to reading the bill and positioning themselves to deal with those sore points that are, dear to, quote unquote, dear to them or to their people? With regards to the timing in terms of reform, at the beginning of the administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, subsidy was removed, floated the Naira and all that. So as a strategist, I believe that also reforms should be well thought out, and then there should be sequencing of the implementation, indeed follow up to conceptualization of reforms, and there should be what you call the building blocks, such that, the shocks will not, countermand the initial intent of the reform. For example, there's a lot of argument about how the subsidy was removed. Not that the fuel subsidy should not be removed. And coming up, the tax reform coming now, is giving concern to people with regards to the inflation and what that tax reform will do to our inflation, etc. But that being said, I believe within the framework also, government should come and tell people what is the impact assessment so far with regards to reforms that have been done. And what are we seeing in the short to mid-term, in the future with regards to these tax reforms and the ripple concomitant effect? What are the shock absorbers? So I expect to see what I call the consequence management action plan by government to assuage the fears of people with regards to the impact, because the concerns of people are actually germane.
Then, so let's talk about balancing taxation and development. A lot of critics argue that these reforms could further burden low-income earners, while proponents claim that they are necessary for fiscal growth. In your opinion, how can these tax reforms strike a balance between increasing government revenue and ensuring that they do not hinder the economic prospects of the most vulnerable populations? I ask this because, as an expert in special economic zones yourself, I wonder if you see an opportunity for these reforms to incentivize investments in underdeveloped regions, a situation where these tax policy adjustments could be used to strategically attract businesses to northern Nigeria or other economically lagging areas, as it were.
Thank you very much for that question. Well, as the saying goes, the taste of the pudding is in the eating, right? We are very good with bringing up policies, but implementation is where we always have a problem. And I will say this, like I've been saying in many fora, the tax policy or the fiscal policy and tax reform will only be successful if it goes pari passu with some what I call critical success factors. Of course, the committee also submitted what they call the new fiscal, policy. But I dare say that the existing fiscal policy, as it were, over the years have not been thoroughly or properly optimized. And the question is, how are we going to change that culture? Because we know we have a corporate cultural issue in this country, and that is the bane of our democracy and development. We hope this policy, when enacted, will not be such that they will select some and implement and abandon others, in which case it will not be effectual. For example, unless there is an alignment between fiscal policy and fiscal discipline, there is no amount of reform you will bring in this country that will push us forward. We will just be doing what I call running on a treadmill. You will see the mileage on the meter of the treadmill for those that like treadmill, but you are not actually, achieving the mileage in reality. Because fiscal discipline speaks to cost of governance, speaks to budget padding, and all the processes that lead to the leakages within the system. So it presupposes that if you don't take this wholesome with regards to all the reforms you are doing, these critical success factors, you may have the tax, fiscal policy, and tax reform in play, and the money will still leak away. Why? Because governments, whether it is legislature or executive, will still waste away the money that would have been quote and unquote saved. With regards to revenue, I think I see the cup half full rather than half empty with regards to that. The argument that the tax is supposed to, increase our revenue. I thought the tax is supposed to, like you said, incentivize and catalyze economic activities so that revenues will grow, because in these, the pipelines for revenue should be our productive sector, right? Should be the critical infrastructure to drive that. And for us to be able to reverse import to export. Those are the things that will actually bring the revenue. If we go with this transactional, minute or micro-transactional approach to think that tax is what will increase our revenue, then we are getting it completely wrong. In fairness to the chairman of the Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform, he alluded to that to say they are not targeting revenue, but we all know that federal and state government, and it's not just in Nigeria, use tax as a tool to generate revenue. But that being said, with regards to the vulnerable, I like that question because let us not forget we have almost 133 million of about 200 million Nigerians declared multidimensionally poor at the last quarter of last year. Now, part of the submission of the committee, as they mentioned, which is before the Senate and the National Assembly, is that there will be considerable tax exemptions for the lower strata of society, if you like, including small businesses, where they talk about 97%, tax waiver for corporate tax and all that. But that remains to be seen, because I wanted the committee, and in this case, rather than the arguments of killing the bill at this stage at the National Assembly, for the Senate or the House of Assembly to look at the provisions vis-a-vis the informal sector. Ladies and gentlemen, the informal sector accounts for about 80% of the Nigerian economy. And this informal sector may not necessarily be in this, wavelength or bandwidth of the small businesses, I assume the chairman of the Fiscal Reform Committee is talking about, because most of those people don't even have registered companies at the CAE and all that. And then also, with regards to taxing the big businesses, which I'm a very big proponent of, most of those big businesses and the big men, the politicians, don't pay the taxes. How are we able to make sure that they pay those taxes? And how do we put safeguards such that they don't pass those costs back to the populace? And in this case, not just the business, including the politicians that are shouting today, because they also have a way of passing those costs to the citizens when they take the money, either directly or by, graft, and deny the citizens of what they should have gotten. So yes, but like I said, we need to look at it wholesome, and in this game, execution is very key with regards to the process. I will land with this. The integrity of the process is also what will ensure success, like what we are seeing in the National Assembly. Much as we want this reform, I'm a proponent of the reform, by the way, but we should be careful how we go about enacting these laws so that we don't throw the baby with the bathwater, or we don't circumvent the process in order to achieve, an objective which will make it emotional and impulsive rather than strategic.
Thank you very much for your
for all your submissions this morning. It's very engaging, and I really like that you brought up fiscal discipline, because that's where my question was heading. As you said, if we do not plug the leakages, if we do not properly implement the policy, then it would have no effect. But I want to ask why you believe some of the northern governors, for example, Governor Zulum of Borno, has come out to say that this policy would be bad for the north. You know, some people argue that the governors are not incentivized to build the economies within their state due to how they receive FAC allocations, due to the political power that they wield. So I want to ask why you believe that the governors are pushing against this, particularly in the north, and also how you view governors, some members of the House of Reps saying that the governors are pressuring them, because obviously we need separation of powers and rule of law, because you did speak about we need to make the big companies pay this tax. But without rule of law, without judicial reform, we can't implement this policy properly, because if there are no consequences for bad actions, then bad actions will continue. So, you know, why do you think the governors in the north are pushing out against this? Do you think that they have abandoned their role of human capital development, of economical development, and are reliant on these allocations that they're getting? And if you believe that the company income tax, for example, of 27.5%, or the development levies being put on these companies are going to help them grow, or are going to restrict them further?
Thank you very much for that question. I really appreciate it. You know, I would like to step back, permit me to step back, because this conversation about North-South, but I would like to address it as a Northerner, because there's a lot of notions, and I think some of us need to come and start speaking to those issues if indeed we want to face our realities and make positive trajectory, you know, in this country. I remember I mentioned in my podcast, Reflections with Baba Yusuf, I had a course to speak to Northern Nigerians, and the title is, Dear Northern Nigeria, What Have We Done to Ourselves? And speaking to this, and speaking, you know, about the position of the governors and some of these politicians, who, in my own opinion, with profound respect, only rise to speak to issues that are only self-serving, with due respect. I become a bit worried when governors start running helter-skelter, you know, because, you know, federal allocation may be trickling down. It's not stopping. It's only trickling down, and you hear people saying they cannot pay salary. And that, to me, is a huge concern as a Northerner. Steve, Adeshu and Shoiton, there are three critical principles of a leader: value creation, value protection, and value innovation. Those are the three cardinal things that make a leader. You can step back and just hypothesize and say each state in Nigeria could be a country. Indeed, there are countries around the world that are not bigger than some states in Nigeria, even smaller than some states in northern Nigeria, and those countries are excelling and succeeding. What am I saying? Everywhere you step in northern Nigeria, you are stepping on wealth. Everywhere, with no exception. And the same goes to other parts of Nigeria. This transactional rent-seeking methodology of leadership should stop. This is not how the vanguards, you know, of our liberation from colonialism ran this country. And in this case, the late sage, you know, Obafemi Awolowo, Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, Ahmadu Bello, you know, the likes of Dr. Zik, and all those vanguards of our liberation. This is not how they led us. Otherwise, we wouldn't have come to where they have met. Today, we are still celebrating infrastructure they have built before. So this, for me, is a wake-up call. For example, what happened when COVID broke out? When COVID broke out, the entire world came to its knees. And everybody will now sit on his hands and say, we cannot run our states. As far as I'm concerned, if governors cannot now constructively, you know, address this constructive disruption that is coming, because whether it is tax reform or whatever, we are seeing this disruption coming that will have to engender creative thinking for leaders. The insecurity in northern Nigeria for over 15 years is speaking to the need for value creation and value innovation. We cannot always throw our hands up and say, hey, the north is backward, hey, we cannot do anything. Let's not forget that we have produced the highest number of presidents in this country, you know, from any region in this country. So what is our excuse today to start lamenting, Every time a policy comes that we cannot achieve anything, we cannot pay salary. I believe that we should be more forward-thinking, as leaders, not just the governors, including the legislators, and quote and unquote what I call the elites. Because we, the elites, have been contributing to the backwardness of this country, whether it is northern Nigeria or southern Nigeria. Now we have the politicians speaking, like you mentioned, the allusion, the allegation by some members of the National Assembly that their governors are pressuring them. I love it because from a political perspective, I want to see the influence of these governors, on the legislature vis-a-vis to deliver the mandate that the people have asked them to do. This will be a litmus test for them. But over and beyond that, I also want the people to take destinies in their hands. Let us watch the optics, and let us hold government to account, whether they are governors or whoever. For 1 year, the commissioners of finance of states and the heads of inland revenues of state have been engaging these committees. Why haven't they taken a position to be having meetings, to be calling meetings, to put their own positions forward and argue it out and negotiate it through debate and constructive engagement? Since nobody is pushing this down anybody's throat, why are we the only ones lamenting? By the way, with regards to issues like this, it touches my heart as a northerner. It makes us look as if we are unintelligent, as if we don't have options, when indeed we are the food basket of the nation, when indeed we have a lot we have been contributing and we have more to contribute. Let's not talk as if we are beggars, like we have the highest population of beggars on the street. So it sounds like the leaders are now becoming the beggars themselves. Let's not be beggarly. Value creation, value innovation, value protection, Your Excellency. That is the way to go.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Baba Yusuf. Thanks for the frankness that you've brought into this debate. But before we let you go, just a quick one. I like the fact that you emphasize the area where it looks like it's the north, that is complaining. And of course, if we followed what the governor of Borno State has been saying lately, it will look like maybe it's a new version of the governor that seems to be, complaining now. But of course, if you also now tie that to what NEC asked the president to do at the end of October, recommending that the bill be withdrawn for what they call wider consultation and consensus building. What would be your specific advice to the federal government and to the president, specifically now that the bill has passed second reading, in the Senate? I think one key area that people appear to be worried about is the fact that about 60 federal institutions will be stopped from revenue collection. Everything will now go to Federal Inland Revenue Service, which of course will also undergo a name change. People are worried that who therefore will be the agents and consultants that will be collecting on behalf of the new named FRC, and what percentage will they be collecting? Maybe there is a fear somewhere that is feeding the apprehension among the people. So what would be your specific advice on this knotty issue?
Okay. For the federal government going forward, I think one of the takeouts will be, although it's not time for postmortem, but we can still take corrective action. Consultation, 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 consensus building, Mr. President. We are in a democracy, and we must reflect that. The committee would have done better, like I mentioned earlier, but I think also the governors should have engaged because they are members of the National Economic Council. This was not done behind a closed door that they were not aware. Their commissioners of finance have briefed them. The heads of their internal revenue, respective internal revenue, has briefed them. They had the opportunity to even call out the committee to say, we are not hearing anything at that level to report to Mr. President. That was not done, and that is why we are where we are. I think Mr. President is trying to be bullish by pushing it in. That being said, we have the principles of separation of powers. We have a structure, we have a vehicle called the National Assembly, where it is a parliament, where issues will be thrashed out. But my advice now to the subnationals, for example, the Northern Governors Forum, or even the NEC as National Governors Forum, I remember Excellency Sheyi Makinde was the one that came out, to state the position of the governors. Fine and good. If you want that, we don't have to pull out the bill. You can now come from a strategic point of view and assert yourself. Speak to your members of your state assemblies and national assembly. Speak to your citizens, you know, on the critical issues. Now, in this case, my big advice, Steve, is people should read the bill, because it appears there's a lot of emotion. People don't even read the bill. We cherry pick what we read in the bill, and we see how it affects us, whether it is north, south, east, west, or political reasons. If we do that, we can now, from a strategic point of view, pick up these issues in debates, in public hearings, and deal with these issues, so that at the end of the day, if it is a bill that we feel wholesome should be thrown out, loud and clear, Mr. President will now see that this is a democracy that is working. It is a bill that now flies. We know it flies with only the provisions that are supposed to reflect the yearnings and aspirations of people. And to that extent, I'm not going to speak to the National Assembly or the President. I'll speak to you, Steve, Shoiton, Adeshua, myself, the so-called elites of this country, who rather sit on the fence when critical issues like this come. Either we come as analysts and blow our grammars, or we write somewhere and lament. We should engage in the political process. These public hearings, we should be there. Subject matter experts like us should engage. You know, otherwise, the people that are in the National Assembly, with due respect to them, not all of them understand these nuances. And even when they do, sometimes they bring their own political interests to push as an agenda. So we should engage and make our voices heard, the CSOs and even individuals. And I will tell you with a quote from Rohini Lenekali, you know, a writer that says, "We cannot be mere consumers of good governance. We must be co-creators. We must, as citizens, we have to co-create good governance. We cannot outsource it and hope to be passively happy consumers. Like anything worth its while, good governance must be earned." And to that extent, the citizens, especially the elites, we have a core responsibility to also engage and strip that policy apart and make our contributions. Now, with regards to a very important area for me, special economic zone and the corporates, I know that definitely there is need for us to address that issue, because at the end of the day, enforcement is key. If we are not able to enforce these regulations, the fact that we have a single point of payment, I agree with, because there's a lot of corruption and leakages with these agencies of government. But we'll still have the same situation if we don't deal with the framework of collection, like you said. We don't want to have these agencies that will come special purpose vehicles, you know, for vested interest to fret away the money that will be collected.
Definitely. Thank you so much, sir, for your submissions this morning. It has been a very enlightening conversation. Thank you for joining us on the morning show, Mr. Baba Yusuf. It's